Hi, everyone, and welcome to the last panel of the third season of Conversations. I can't believe it's been 3 seasons already. Um, and I'm really, really excited for today's topic, which is LLM evals. And I think this has been on so many people's minds, and there's so many ways to approach it, so many different perspectives and takes on things. So I'm really excited to hear from all of you. So let's do a quick round of introductions and then we'll get right into it. So, Ciara, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Hi. My name is Ciara Anderson. I'm currently the founder and an AI consultant at the Prompt Loom, which is an AI consultancy agency. We focus on evaluating prompt architectures, evaluations, building new AI products, internal tools, all that kind of stuff. My background is in linguistics and conversational AI. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Bella, you want to go next?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Bella. I am the head of conversational AI at Pearl, where we connect users with professional services online, and we connect professionals with clients and other sort of AI-enabled features to help them, run their businesses. We build, a ton of bots, ton of agents, and use conversational AI in all of these ways to make everybody's lives easier, hopefully.
Awesome. Lorraine?
Hello, hi. I apologize that I'm logging in from my phone, but hopefully you can see and hear me well. So I head up conversation design in Lloyds Banking Group. It's one of the largest, actually, it's the largest digital UK bank. So lots of clients, lots of customers, and huge opportunities to use conversational AI. Currently, the assistant in production is NLU based, but like everyone, we're exploring the agentic space. So really excited for this conversation to learn from everyone.
Yeah, thanks. Deepika?
Hey everyone, I'm Deepika. I'm a senior conversation designer at Intuit. Currently, I'm working on their QuickBooks assistant. So QuickBooks, the software that's for small to, I think, mid-sized business owners as well. My background is in interaction design, but 8 years ago, I transitioned to conversation design. And most of my career was in Amazon, working on Alexa and designing their multimodal conversational experiences. And I'm really excited about this topic and looking forward to hearing everyone's perspectives as well.
Yeah, well, thank you all for being here. And I guess the first question I have is, what are LLM evals, or what do they mean to you? Because I think they mean different things to different people, and there are different things you can evaluate. So just curious how everyone is thinking about it. Deepika, do you want to go first?
Yeah, in my current work, LLM evals is really just looking at the AI model's outputs and making sure it's meeting the defined quality standards that you and the partner teams that you work with you have set. And what really it's measuring on different dimensions. Like it could be correctness, relevance, completeness. These are, I think, industry specifics. But then, based on the domain that you're working in, you might have some specific rubric or metrics that you are evaluating the AI model's output against. And typically, there is this another I would say layer that comes in, which is ground truth. You use your ground truth to evaluate the model responses. And one thing I want to say, like for me, LLM evals is not just evaluating whether the answer is right, but evaluating whether it's right for the right reasons, whether the model it followed the right process to get to that answer.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think in contrast to older or the original conversational AI systems where things were a lot more deterministic. So things like the brand voice and the tone, and do you want to be more empathetic here, or do we need to escalate here? Being in line with so many different dimensions in terms of like brand fit and persona is all part of the evaluation process now a lot more, because it's designed, but it has to be evaluated because it's not necessarily as predictable. And even as far as grounding and retrieval augmented generation, company documents, are we retrieving the right documents? There are just so many layers to that, I think.
Yeah, I agree and love the answer so far. I think it comes down to quality, right? How do we measure quality? And I think that, I think good conversation designers have been doing evals since before there were LLMs, right? We just called it by so many different names. And as you said, Ciara, there, right now that we're using LLMs and are increasingly not able to kind of hand plant everything in the garden, it becomes less about I have total control maybe of what I'm scripting or what I'm building, and more about, well, let me take a step back and think about, well, what is quality, right? Like quality is accuracy, quality is you know, do I follow the requirements of this prompt, right? And you have to really think deeply about like, well, what do I care about? And so kind of the shift, even I think the shift in evals is also mapping into the shift of what the job is, right? Moving from fine tuning to sort of maybe being a landscape architect and saying, I want to make sure that we have flowers and I want to make sure that we have trees, but I'm not going to plant them, right? I just need to make sure that we have all of those features so that the garden looks the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, just to build on that as well, I completely agree that it's it comes down to quality, and with these models, we're not scripting the conversations anymore, so we can't guarantee that quality. And I think that's where it gets really interesting, because we have to design it indifferently. As designers, it's up to us to kind of define what does good even look like, because everyone coming at this comes with a different lens. Depending on who's working on it, product people might be thinking about completion or conversion. Your risk people might be thinking about compliance, but who's actually thinking about that user experience and what that quality means. And actually, quality has different layers. It is risk and compliance as well as the experience, but definitely when it comes to the experience, we need to define that so that we can evaluate it and automate that evaluation.
Yeah, and to add one more thought to everyone's perspectives, voice and tone, right? Like previously, we used to, in the NLU world, script all the answers, like all the responses, design templates. In today's world with LLMs, they are pretty good at, generating natural language and conversing with the user. But I have seen voice and tone still lack a lot. Like you would, for example, for a QuickBooks assistant, a customer would ask a very conversational question and then still get a response which is very like document like 1 2 3 kind of steps, and I have been noticing that in evals a lot. Like voice and tone, it's kind of taken for granted because we just believe LLMs are going to handle it, but I think voice and tone needs to get a little bit more weightage when we are designing these rubrics and quality, and doing the quality assessment.
That's true. And I think I've noticed too that whereas in the past, quality assurance, quality assessments, QA, all of that came at the end, I've noticed now that with new builds, evals are a part of the build constantly from the very beginning, and comparing prompt versions and tone and output. So yeah, plugging that in right from the beginning, I've noticed, is becoming a lot more common.
I love that you said that, Ciara. We have been trying to coin a phrase internally called evals-driven development, right? Where
I like it.
don't even start with the prompt. Like start with your evals, right? Get a product manager, like collaboratively be like, what are the requirements, right? Like, let's talk about it now on day 0 before, before at the end when it's like, oh, okay, well, if you wanted that eval, like that, like these things start to get wrapped up really, really together. So, I think that's a question that I so often hear from people, right? Oh, when should I do the evals in the process? And it's like, do them as early as you can. Do them maybe before you even put fingers to keyboard to write a prompt.
And how often do you evaluate? That's another thing I think it should be very often and continuous and every single change, but curious how you approach it.
Yeah, very often from my perspective, I've been focusing a lot on pre-production builds at the moment. So I know, post-production, you're looking at more observability and also human in the loop. But yeah, from day 0, like Bella said, you've got, if it's a simple use case like an HR bot, a customer service bot, something like that, you're going to need your golden data set, human evaluated, SME input, expert human input. You need to be measuring your prompt versioning and your prompt performances from the very beginning to see how they do. Your RAG retrieval, so your documents, if it's getting really complex, are you calling the right tools? Are you calling APIs at certain points in the conversation? So it's an iterative process. And I think that's where automating evaluations is going to come in, because with so many prompt changes and version control, human in the loop is necessary, but also automated testing is necessary because it's so frequent.
That was going to be my next question is how do you balance human versus automated evals? And I guess how do you approach, what's the balance look like, and how much control do you have over what the automated evals?
Personally, I like to start with a human eval, a subject matter expert, someone who really knows what they're talking about. And once we start to build and I get a good idea of the brand itself, the product requirements, that's when I start to bring in tools where I can evaluate at scale. But I think best practice would always be to take 10 to 20% of your conversations, your generated content, and ideally have, even if it's just a small team of humans in the loop, being able to refine and evaluate. But yeah, that's just my perspective. Yeah.
I can jump in and kind of share a little bit of our journey. I think, like many teams out there, we have been exploring over the past year or so. I don't think we've landed on the perfect answers, but I can share the explorations that we've been on, and maybe it's helpful. So we started with human evaluations. In retrospect, that was exactly the right thing to do, because as we said earlier, we have to define what we're actually trying to evaluate here. What are we looking for? What does good look like? And actually, everyone defines good in a different way. But we've spent many hours just with manual review, and essentially when we realized that we didn't have one kind of single benchmark for a quality response, our designers actually kind of created these golden responses, model answers we called them, which would be the ideal answer to key questions, and they became like the benchmark for quality. And so our manual review was really focused around measuring the LLM outputs against these model answers, but actually that's really tricky to do, and it's so detailed and subjective as well that it becomes very difficult to scale. So there's another problem that we came across. How did we tackle it? I mean, we dissected the model answers that we'd created. What actually makes them good? And by doing that, we were able to kind of identify attributes, which we then built into an evaluation framework, which we use both for manual review and then to feed into an automated tool. That's our process. Curious to hear how others have tackled it.
To me, automated evals and human evals, they serve two different purposes. Automated evals really give you scale, speed, coverage. Like if you want to run evals across, like, I don't know, thousands of rows, and you want to flag patterns at scale and catch patterns that are, like obvious, they are really good. The automatic evals are really good for that. Human evals are really strong when you want to catch what the automated evals cannot see, right? Like there are blind spots, there are edge cases, and you want to calibrate your rubric. That's when I found human evals to be really helpful. Um, and I also feel a combination of two works the best. So without, if you only go with automated evals, you'll run into a lot of like blind spots and never be able to catch that. But if you only do human evals, then you wouldn't be able to scale it to like more and more data.
I like that answer. I think it resonates with how we've been approaching evals at Pearl, definitely more on the human in the loop side of things, right? I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think we've been doing, and many of us, right, have been doing evals before they were LLM evals, right? And we did something similar, it sounds like, to what you guys have done, Lorraine, of saying, hey, what do you call them? What are the fundamental principles of bot goodness, is what we call them, right? Like the traits or the attributes that when the bot does this, it correlates with, business outcomes, right? Or like the success metrics that we care about. And we did that all manually, right? We would have teams just sit down and label. And then for us, when LLMs came on the scene, and we moved away from NLU and NLP, we really embraced LLMs as our judges as well, and have really, I think, taken more of an LLM first sort of approach with our evals, while still having humans in the loop to ensure quality of those evals. I think a lot of it comes down. I think a lot of everything with evals comes down to risk, right? Like that's, I think, the magic word. And for us, I think a lot of it just depends on what type of content, like what type of generative AI content are you evaluating. For us, we do a lot of actually intake conversations, right? So we have agents that are asking for more information about users to better connect them to the right professionals, right? Like the best lawyer for your situation online. And that changes the risk for us, right? We care more about how are the questions that we're asking, as opposed to, are we answering perhaps like banking information very accurately, or like sensitive accounting information accurately, and that changes the risk calculus. And so for us, we can like embrace more and more of the advantages of using LLM as judges, and be a little bit less I don't know, invested in spending the time to do human evals. But everybody's going to have a different situation on their hands for sure.
I definitely resonate with that, the customization of different use cases within a larger use case. So I do think that's the beauty of something like LLM as a judge, where you can automate, but it's still quite a bit of work to get that automation set up. As you're saying, for in your case, a lawyer versus a nutrition expert and something like that, the expertise, the rubric, the tone, everything, it could be slightly different. So you may need to be building unique internal tools across a range of use cases. So there's a lot of nuance and complexity. So it adds work in some ways in terms of building, but having purely humans do that is, yeah, I think unsustainable for sure.
And maybe going more deep into like what exactly are you evaluating? As in, are you evaluating the outputs of the models, or also the reasoning, maybe the customer responses? Is it the full conversation, or only like turn per turn? Would be curious to hear more on like the details of your process.
I can
Yeah, go for it.
The recent one that I've done, it is multi-layered. So you do evaluate, obviously, the AI responses, the model responses, but I've seen that in the process, I'm also evaluating whether the ground truth in the golden data set, whether that was correct or not in the first place, because they do get stale over time. Maybe there were some changes on the product side, right? Like very simple example, the UI changed, and then those steps are no longer true. So in that process, you don't just look at the AI responses, but also the golden data set, the ground truth. And another layer is judging the judge itself if you're using the automated evals. And I mentioned previously about blind spots. I have run into cases where the judge would mark a response as complete and hallucination free, and then still mark it as incorrect. So like there are internal contradictions in the rubric, and being able to flag that is also sort of like part of the evals. And the way we have been sort of like, I would say, structuring the verdict that your human in the loop gives, it's it's on 3 dimensions: whether the ground truth is wrong, or the judge is wrong, or the agent itself is wrong. And then if you have done like multiple eval runs, you also want to make sure the second time you run the eval, the agent's quality hasn't regressed. That's something I've also seen, like in the first eval run, for example, the agent was giving the correct answer, but in the second one, it just regressed. It started, let's say, if it was doing the action for the customer, it started now giving steps. So that's also something that's worth flagging in the evaluation. So it's multi-layered. You keep flagging the things that there are teams who can fix those issues, and that has been really helpful, like as a process, and evolving it as you do the eval and find these issues.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And in terms of AI agents and agentic AI, now with things like the model context protocol approaches, where within turns in the conversation, you might need to be sending information to a particular tool or retrieving information from a particular tool in a particular JSON format. So I think turn by turn in those cases, it's really important to be able to flag those. But definitely the full conversation, as Deepika mentioned, conversations drift over time. Context can get lost in the middle. Very simply, if you've given your name and at the beginning of the conversation and it goes on long, does the agent remember your name by the end of it? So in the completeness and coherence as well, in terms of a full, complete conversation, is also really important.
Yeah, I think as many ways. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
I think as many ways as you can slice it, it's worth trying to evaluate, right? Because exactly like you said, Ciara, if you drop, if a bot is handling something well and then drops it at the end, that's worth flagging. But also, if you're only looking at the whole transcript, I feel like sometimes single misstep can be overlooked, like in the composite view. When we actually were having a conversation about this earlier this morning with my team about how, like, maybe you should also be evaluating at the transcript so far, right? Because you might have things about adaptability or efficiency, and if you're only evaluating at the end of the whole transcript, it doesn't actually capture the spirit of the user in the moment, right? Like the user in the moment is going back and forth, and if eventually the conversation corrects, you look at that afterwards and you're like, oh, good, it corrected. But does that capture the feeling that the user has in the moment of being like, oh my God, this is dragging. Okay, eventually, finally, thank God, we've gone in the right way. And I don't know, like it would be an interesting thing to run some internal tests on, like comparing eval scores at different slices and maybe testing that critical assumption. But I think that we're still, I think many of us in this age of figuring out what is the line of, doing too much with your evals or doing too little. And I think where you slice it is a huge part of that question for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I guess the way that we've approached it, we've kind of split it into two different ways. So single turn and then multi-turn. And we've started with single turn because that's where we can really get into the details of being able to understand, has this answer met all of our quality evaluation criteria? But then multi-turn is, it's a whole other game, because someone has to actually be having that conversation if you want to automate that. And you need to be able to, like you said, you need to be able to test over an entire interaction, the whole course of the conversation. So, does the agent maintain that context? Does it stay grounded in the knowledge base? Does it keep the conversation moving forward? So it's really an ongoing testing cycle, and constantly we're reviewing results, prioritizing issues that we find, and then implementing fixes and then retesting. So it's all about kind of continuous improvement and fast iteration, basically.
Plus one to Lorraine on like this being an iterative and continuous process. And I have found multi-turn conversations to be specifically very difficult to evaluate, because in a multi-turn conversation, so we take production transcripts, the conversations that customers have actually had in production with the agent. And when we look at those conversations, there would be like, for example, like 2-3 topics in one session, in one conversation. And how do you evaluate a conversation that is covering 3 different topics, and each topic probably failed because of a different root cause? And so a design decision that we have taken, like when we are doing the evals, we only add the multi-turn conversations in the golden data set that focus on one single topic. So we sort of like slice them into different conversations. But I think it's risky because in real life, people do, like go back and forth on topics. So I'm curious if anyone else has, followed a process to evaluate conversations that cover multiple topics, like what has been your like design decision and just the framework for evaluation.
Was that specifically to me, or was that to everyone?
For everyone. Whoever has.
I'll let someone else jump in.
I was just going to say that I would treat that as training data, and treat those. I'm working on different kinds of use cases, but the first thought that comes to mind is that those would be edge cases where maybe we need to build a new rubric of, conversations that trail, or conversations that circle, and conversations that loop back, and perhaps use ideal versions of that, or create human labeled versions of that, where even though there was some jumping back and forth and trailing, it was still a good overall experience. So I don't have an explicit design decision, but I would definitely treat that as an edge case and consider using it as training data.
We actually have a lot of people like switching mid conversation and doing a lot of that stuff. So for us, it would be like a main thing that we would want to measure. And I think a lot of it is just making sure, is the intent understood every time? Is it doing what it needs to do? Is it directing the conversation if the user pivots? Does it understand? Does it remember that context? Does it not bring in that context from previous conversations that isn't relevant. So yeah, it's just really getting granular with each turn, I think. But curious if anyone else has a different approach.
I mean, I can talk about our, the specific things that we are evaluating for, which I know, there are some generic frameworks, but we found that they weren't necessarily that helpful for us to identify kind of whether this is a good response or not. We've sort of landed on about 8 quality criteria when we're looking at the quality, the experience quality, things like accuracy, relevance, completeness, conversation flow, information hierarchy, readability, inclusivity, clarity, things like that. So, and tone, we were talking about tone earlier. I think these, we identified them as critical to what needs to be there if we're to say this is a quality response. And so that's then fed into creating an evaluation framework, which we can then apply to single turn, multi-turn. It kind of is our benchmark.
Yeah, I really like that, especially the part about conversation flow. I think having that as part of the rubric will help you um, pinpoint when the conversation wasn't on track, especially in a multi-turn conversation, and when the agent lost track of the context and gave a completely an answer that it felt like it was unaware of what's going on previously. So I really like that. Thank you for sharing.
I'm curious if others have found other definitions of like good or something else to add to these principles that apply to different use cases that others might benefit from knowing about.
You could also look at the quality of retrieved information. So if you're retrieving information from grounded data, I think you need to evaluate that too, with the cost of token usage and things like that. Are you retrieving a whole bunch of context? Are you retrieving 50 somewhat relevant documents, or when you only needed to retrieve maybe 5 pertinent documents? So I think things like, the retrievability, the accuracy, and then 2, if you're retrieving too much context from your documentation, that's going to kind of muddy the waters in terms of a response, and that could affect the clarity of the response from your grounded data. So I think, again, when you're building your RAG system, your grounding system, that those evaluations need to come into play. And you can, have evaluations relating to what does the output look like? Is it a specific JSON format of all they really need to know is how many weeks maternity leave? They don't need the other 5 pages, so you can kind of filter that information and save. So I think cost and token efficiency and the context retrieval from there too are important dimensions to consider.
Yeah, I think these all resonate probably with many of us, right? Of like these are kind of the core bread and butter. I would also add, I think another interesting use case that is also pretty universal, right, is like similarity, especially when you're going through the use case of switching models, right? Like sometimes you're moving from, GPT 4 to 4.1, and that's kind of a small step, but how do you ensure that you can do that safely without maybe having to run, a whole A/B test, right? Or something where you're saying, okay, did this stay the same? And also thinking about evals is, does this look like what it used to look like, right? Like fundamentally a regression test, and being able to say, is it safe for us to move to a mini model, right? To save on to reduce latency and save money, and how not only should we run our quality evals, but also should we run evals around, like, is this semantically similar enough, right? Like, or was there, and those two things work together, right? Because something could be semantically similar, but have like the one thing that's missing be really, really important, or the inverse, right? Of like, oh, maybe they don't score on, cosine similarity being too similar, but actually all of the evals check out. And so I think also we can think about quality in many ways, right? Objective quality, and then also sort of comparative quality of, like, as we move through perhaps a development process, or need to make changes for other reasons. Maybe pulling from those types of evals as well to feel good about the decision to go ahead.
I'd also add personalization. I think that's for me is it ranks at the top for a good answer, because you could give customer a very sort of like a general answer, and that's correct, complete, accurate, like all those dimensions, but still not useful because especially for something like QuickBooks or any other like software out there where you are really looking to learn more about your data, and the agent is not taking that into account. To me, as a customer, that won't really be a helpful answer, right? Like, I could have gotten this answer on other platforms out there. Like, I could have done a Google search, for example, but why this agent integrated with my product? Because it can give me personalized answers.
So we have a couple questions in the chat that I want to get to. So first, going back a little bit, do LLM evaluations solely reside within a designer's purview? Curious what kind of working model you've all seen at your workplaces. Does anyone
We're
wanna...
running with a we have everybody running prompts, right? And both for personal productivity, but I think we're using prompts not just to guide and govern conversations, but for other user-facing content as well, right? On the page, or SMS and email, these types of things, right? And I think that what we've found is that when you set up specific people as being like eval gurus, that creates bottlenecks. That is antithetical to the promise of AI being like the great scaler. And so what we've been finding is that it's helpful to tie evals as part of an expectation of any production prompt delivery process, right? And so maybe you're a conversation designer, maybe you're a prompt engineer, maybe you're a software developer, maybe you're a CRM specialist, but instilling that as an intrinsic knowledge of how to do it, and then also a critical like deliverable, right? Like acceptance criteria. That prompt is not done until evals have also been attached as like a show your receipts of quality. It's the thing that puts you on the hook. If something goes wrong on production, well, hey, look, the evals passed, so something went wrong. Things go wrong, but it's helpful for anybody to have, I find. And I think it makes people better at writing prompts as well. Like, getting excited about evals has made me a better prompt writer, for sure. So that's my take on that question.
I definitely agree, especially coming from more of a consulting perspective. I would say it's virtually impossible to come in and have somebody say, here's our prompt architecture, evaluate it. You need to speak to the content. If it's, for example, I worked on an audio experience, if there are content writing experts within the team who can give their expertise, they should. The founder has their own idea in terms of what is our brand? How do we want this experience to feel? How do we not want it to feel? A lot of very subjective things where, if I just read on paper, it needs to be educational, or it needs to be adventurous or informative or whatever. That means a lot of different things to different people. So, and then engineers. So if you're looking at things like API calls, again, I keep talking about that, but there's so many different teams that need to decide, as Bella said, if this was a successful experience. And I think that's all part of that evaluation process and package.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely cross-functional, and it starts with sort of understanding, to pick up on your point, understanding on what success looks like from all the different layers that you need to address. So, for example, I spoke about experience measurements that our design team have kind of fed in, but we also have things which are important to the business, like, let's say being able to identify vulnerability, because if that's the case, then we need to be able to handle that scenario differently. So that needs to be fed in as well. As a regulated industry as well, we have compliance things as well that need to be taken into consideration, and risk and legal teams need to help be involved in setting up the evals, helping us all understand what is it that we're going after. And then when we have that shared understanding, what do we need to be testing for? Just to echo, for us, it has been very much a team effort. It's not just designers. It is cross-functional across the entire team. And having that shared framework is what lets us do that in to as consistent a standard as you can through manual review.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, yeah, +1, it's very cross-functional. In my work, I collaborate a lot with the science team on setting up they're the ones who set up the evals, but like working with them to define the rubric, and giving them inputs to improve LLM as a judge, making sure it gets accurate the more we run these evals. So yeah, very cross-functional.
So we have another question about fallback answers, but I think I'm going to leave that one for the chat because I think there's more to discuss there. And there's one other one about where are you seeing agents consistently fail the most? And I'm curious if where it fails is caught by human evaluation or LLM evaluation or both.
I mean, I can start us off just with an example from some of our early testing. This was in the first version of an agent that we're it's not in production. We're still exploring it. Actually, it's live to a beta colleague population, but the first version really just pointed to existing content that we had. So website, public websites, product information, terms and conditions, things like that. And in the first instance, like so many teams, designers were not necessarily involved in setting up the model, and our team had been given access to that final copy editing tone layer, and when that was the case, we kept on testing, and it kept on failing on experience. It kept on surfacing these concepts that we just couldn't pinpoint. And what we understood was that actually the content that's feeding the systems is incredibly important as well. It will determine the quality of the responses. And this was very early learning for us. Within the first couple of months, we realized that actually your legacy content isn't AI ready. It's not AI consumable. And when you're using multiple different sources, you will have contradictions in that content. For us, that surfaced as, agent responses that weren't aligned with what was on our website, for example. So in that instance, I know it's very kind of self-contained example, but we realized very quickly what was happening. And two things. Firstly, we needed to sort out the content and actually have a bespoke knowledge base. And secondly, we needed to open up the agent graph to designers as well, who have that in-depth kind of expertise to work with data scientists and adjust the prompts to.
I've had a slightly different experience in terms of long form content. So I was, again, recently working on long form audio content that, again, had a particular persona, particular use cases. Let's say some are educational, some are more informative, some are more a narrative structure and things like that. And despite the best prompting and the best evaluations, the longer it goes on, you're still seeing that drift and that context drift and repetition of things unnecessarily. AI generated sounding language. So that's another another thing where a lot of the, if it's not this, it's this, and trying to have things be more natural and more amenable to the human ear. So some things that helped were, again, few shot prompting. So, here are some ideal long form conversations. Here are some ideal long form audio experiences. And then things like prompt chaining, where you're not necessarily shoving all of the context through at every single point of a long form experience, be it a written experience or an audio experience, but you're trying to be specific in terms of what's relevant here and what should I pass down so that we can keep the flow and keep the narrative of the conversation going. But I think that's an ongoing problem just in general. So I haven't, it's not something that we managed to completely solve, but those were some failures that we saw and some steps that helped along the way.
Anyone else want to jump in? Or? Oh, good.
Yeah. I have voice and tone, definitely. Like that's my top one. Like repeating what the user asked, and using sort of like a lot of like bells and whistles to give the answer in more than 200 words, which could have been very well communicated in 50 words. So that's a big one where agent seems to be failing a lot. Other is, I think, Lorraine, you mentioned, if I understood that correctly, stale content. And I think that's a content problem, right? Like there needs to be something somewhere in the architecture where that piece keeps getting up to date, so that the agent is always taking from the up-to-date information. The third one that I have recently found, it's what are the boundaries that the agent needs to draw for ambiguous queries. Like, for example, if I ask, how do I create an invoice? I mean, you can argue it's a how-to question, right? Like, the customer would be interested in the steps, but you could also look at it from another angle, which is they are here to do an action, which is create an invoice. So should the agent just lead with, yeah, I can help you with that, and why don't you give me this information? Again, it goes back to maybe that's a design decision that needs to go in the prompt, but I have seen that for ambiguous queries like these, the agent is not able to sort of like disambiguate, and it is heavily reliant on the conversation design principles and like how the agent should be resolving for questions like these.
I like what you say about ambiguity being like a brittle place, and I would even connect that back to this tone and style. Like, are the I don't know, the tricky thing for so many of us, because even that is also an example of ambiguity. And one of the reasons that I brought up, like, semantic similarity before is because we also have seen this a lot in like these things that are ambiguous to interpretation being also so different model to model, right? And like being like, okay, we finally got tone and style to work with GPT 3.5 Turbo, and the customers love it, right? Like they're responding really positively to it. We'd like to move to the newest model, and the same instructions about tone and style are being interpreted completely differently by a new model, and that being so frustrating. And then it's like, okay, how much of what we defined was actually just model interpretation as well? And so that's maybe not a fail or like a brittle point within the same agent, but as you through iteration, like that becomes a really brittle and tricky point to manage. That we're still trying to do the best to handle, and then being really sensitive to like, well, which what does the customer want, and being able to be like, what is it about this they like, and that we can make sure that we can somehow figure out how to enshrine in the prompt and enshrine in the evals, because I think that's the power of the evals, right? Like if the more specific they are, the more it then makes you to try to be specific in the prompt. And at the end of the day, just like ambiguity is the sand trap for all of this, I think.
You know what? I'm actually going to bring in the other question about fallback answers, because it is related to what you were just saying about sometimes for fallbacks, it seems like, okay, I'll just read the whole thing. My question is about fallback answers. What, in your opinion, is the best way to design or instruct those? For golden answers or gold cases, we have nice templates, but for fallbacks, we use protocols now in the prompt, which are not always followed. So how do you deal with models not following instructions? And I guess, do you catch those through evals, or do you, what's your approach to fixing that?
I'll take a stab. I don't have the answer to this question, but I'll share my thinking. In the golden data set, you do not always include happy paths. So you would also include edge cases. So these fallback that we are referring to, they should ideally be in the golden data set, so that they serve as examples to the agent, as to like what to do in case of, like, for example, if there is an error, like what should an ideal response be like. And hopefully there is enough representation of like all these fallbacks or edge cases so that the agent is able to generalize. And not always following the instructions. I think that's we are learning. That's an evolving process in terms of best practices. But the one that I've recently learned is it goes back to the NLU world of conversation design, where whenever you're giving a response to a customer, you follow your, like those crisis maxims: be concise, be relevant. I think now that sort of like practice has turned into writing prompt for the agent, so that you are only giving it the information that's actionable and not like mudding it with a lot of guidelines and instructions that are not going to help the agent to follow them, but like ignore. So like figuring out like where in the prompt you put like those guardrails so that it follows them. That's a whole new I think a discipline that's sort of like emerging as part of this LLM evolution.
Yeah, that was going to be my suggestion, is like try putting it somewhere different in the prompt, or try maybe more specific examples, but then sometimes it over indexes. So then you have to be careful. You have to, just make sure everything's nothing you change regresses anything else in the experience as well. So yeah, that's a tricky one. We're definitely still learning as we go. So I'm going to bring in, there's one more comment, and then, oh, we're almost at time. So then we'll close that after this. There's so much more I wanted to get into, but maybe we'll do a follow-up session or something, because yeah, there's a lot to unpack. So do the different shades of good that you mentioned, like compliance, tone, relevance, completeness, et cetera, have the same weight in the agent evaluation? And have you come to a best practice for a minimum quality threshold that defines that the agent is ready for production?
I can kick us off with that one. So in our own in-house tool that we've been working on with the engineers, we started by kind of taking just a pass-fail approach for certain of these kind of metrics. So if we set a threshold and it's either a yes or a no. Now, you know, that's just a starting point, and we took that because it was quite a complex area, and it's difficult to kind of, it's difficult to know how to evaluate all of these to actually be able to have useful, helpful evaluations. But we also have kind of criteria-based scoring. So complex behaviors like continuation questions might use multi-criteria scoring frameworks. So relevance to user intent, duplication or repetition are some of them. Whether a topic has already been covered. So again, it's either a threshold or a yes or no sort of answer. Yeah, and for us, that's kind of, it seems to be working better than something quite vague like 3 out of 5 on helpfulness, because that actually tells you nothing. We also within our tool we get rationale for why something might have failed, and I think that's where the real value lies. It's in understanding, okay, so this has failed. Rationale is that, for example, the agent here gave a good general introduction, but then it went on to do XYZ, which it shouldn't have done. So yeah, that feeds into.
Yeah, I'll invoke risk again, right, for this question of weight and minimum quality. I'm like both I think for the project and then for the evals themselves, right? Like if the project is really high risk for any reason, right? Like where it exists within the product, what the product is, what the industry is, I'm like, you probably are leaning towards, something in the 90s. And I think we could take a lot of cues from machine learning thresholds, right? Like a whole world there of setting thresholds and around risk appetite. And again, on the other side, if your goal is to ship quickly and learn fast and iterate, I think that my mantra is like, you want your evals to be good enough, right? Like what's the worst you can get away with, right? And still feel like you're going to be in a position to learn, if that's the goal, right? If the learn is to say, I want to ship this, see what customers like, and I'm prepared to yank it and iterate. And I think it's something similar for risk with the evals themselves, right? Like something that we know, for example, in our company, like Deepika, you mentioned personalization. That's huge for us. We know that when our bots or any AI content is less personalized, business metrics go down, right? We make less money. Fewer customers, want to sign up for our product when that happens. And so we're like, we want to ship with the personalization evals that are not regressing, because that's going to be money on the line. Versus there might be other things that are like, maybe we've regressed a little bit on, maybe conversational efficiency or something, but that's okay, because it might even be by design, because maybe we're shipping like a new idea. And maybe the risk is that one eval degrades because of what we're testing. Then you might have other evals, right, that are like guardrail compliance, right? And you're like, what's the worst thing that could happen? We could, the bot could lie and say that it is a human lawyer instead of the lawyer's like AI assistants, right? That's like a huge ethical and legal no-no. And so that's, something where, again, you'd want to be looking for a really high eval on that metric. And so we just are kind of doing a lot of like algorithmic calibration, basically. I know, I think it's, I don't know, people don't love "it depends" as an answer, right? But it depends, doesn't it?
Yeah. Does anyone else have anything else to add? I think, or
I know we are at time.
yeah.
But I can add to answer the question, it is weight dependent. So it's not like, for example, if we have 4 compliance, tone, relevance, completeness, they all don't get like 25% weightage. They would get different. And for us, it's like accuracy is the most important dimension. And voice and tone is the last, which is why like I've been seeing why the responses are lacking in that dimension. So like to Bella's point, you need to like pick your battles, like which one matters the most for your customer, and maybe for different queries or domains, it's a different weightage that you want to assign. Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Awesome. Ciara, anything or?
I totally agree. It's cross-functional. Things like compliance, security would be high up there. And then for those metrics that we can't necessarily cover every aspect of to the highest degree, I like to treat those as data gathering exercises. So, what's the best possible thing, and what did people seem to like? What did they not like? What, were the metrics for the performance wasn't ideal? Could that have impacted it? And then that's information for your design process. So, yeah, it depends, and it's iterative, I think.
Yeah. Sorry, I know we're over time, but thank you all so much for being here. I know there is so much more to cover in this topic. There's subtopics we could go off of it, but this was really, really fascinating, and I learned a lot. So stay tuned for next season. We'll probably we'll announce more panels soon. So hope you all have a wonderful summer, and thank you all for being here and for tuning in.
Thank you so much. It was
Thank you.
great.
Bye.
Bye.